opt to go for the burning bulwark.
Yeah, of course, and I think if the Fluttermane goes down on Nick's side of the field, it becomes a lot easier for Eric.
As we do have the lead of Game 1 of our second top 8 featured match between Nick and Eric. We have Nick with the Gouging Fire, and the Fluttermane does get confirmation on the speed being heightened via that booster energy, whilst Eric going in with the setup potential, Como-O and Ting Lu by its side to actually go ahead and further mitigate the special offensive prowess of Nick's Fluttermane.
Yeah, the Ting Lu is going to be a nice option here just to kind of keep that Fluttermane in check slightly here, but both Pokemon really threatened by what the Fluttermane can do. Nick obviously spotting that, wanting to switch it out, keep it for later on in this match where it may play a really important role.
Yep. As the switch-in is actually going to be the Ogerpon Wellspring. Wants to directly threaten that Ting Lu perhaps, or force a switch out in that slot in the subsequent turn. However, that's no longer going to be the case, as we do have the Fairy Terrestrialization on the Ting Lu.
Yeah, and it does have access to that Heavy Slam, so this will be able to go in, if it is chosen by Eric, into that Ogerpon. So a really nice switch here from Nick. That is the option that we see, but we're going to see a Howl come out from the Gouging Fire. It's going to boost the attack on itself and also the Ogerpon as well, make them a lot more threatening going into this next turn. There is the Heavy Slam. Really nice switch from Nick, but you can see what Eric was trying to do, remove that big special attacking threat, which would then free up his Como-O to go for those iron defenses and really utilize that body press.
Yeah, great little board repositioning from Nick's side. Did actually get a critical hit, which added a tiny bit more of chip damage onto the Ogerpon, but I am sure he'll be able to utilize Horn Leech in combination with those Howl boosts alongside its partner. This is a really good moment where you can sort of nullify any Intimidates that find their way through onto the field if Eric does have that Incineroar available. However, the Amoonguss is now on the field.
Yeah, the Amoonguss is going to come onto the field. The Howl is going to be activated once again by that Gouging Fire, boosting the attack even further as an Ivy Cudgel comes out into the Amoonguss, but able to take it very comfortably here. A nice switch by Eric, and here it is. There's that iron defense. The Como-O starting to get itself set up, become a big threat with those body presses.
Yeah, it's sort of what we were alluding to, the fact that Como-O wants to get maximum setup going as soon as possible, and even if there is a situation later on in the game, if it does incur a burn, it will still be able to have respectable amounts of damage output focused onto Nick's Pokemon.
Yeah, we are going to see the Amoonguss leave the field, activate that Regenerator, get some health back, and the Incineroar hit the field. It is going to drop an all-important Intimidate to lower the attack stat on the Gouging Fire and the Ogerpon as it goes for a Spiky Shield. Not wanting to take any damage this turn, as we see the Heat Crash come out from the Gouging Fire. +1, but not really effective into the Incineroar. Again, a nice switch by Eric, and all the time, another iron defense coming up, boosting that defense by another 2 stages on that Como-O.
Yeah, +4 Como-O is definitely not what you want to see if you are Nick. However, you do have the option of always switching in the Ghost-type Fluttermane if you're trying to catch out a target slot over from Eric's side, and this may be that situation. However, that could also be susceptible to a Iron Head plus attack combination from this Incineroar.
Yeah, the Fluttermane taking the place of the Ogerpon here. Just wanted to save itself for later. The break and swipe coming out from the Gouging Fire. Going to lower the attack stat on the Como-O and that Incineroar. No fake out coming out here, but the body press into that Ogerpon slot. Now the Fluttermane. Really nice switch here from Nick to avoid that as a parting shot coming out from the Incineroar, further reducing that attack stat on the Gouging Fire, making it less of a threat for the other options that Eric has on his team.
And the fact that now you do have the Gouging Fire sort of reset back to neutral, and having the option of bringing that Incineroar back into the field or switching it in at a later turn does mean at least you're reducing the damage output that this Como-O has to incur. However, the fact that Ting Lu has Terrestrialized means that the Como-O is sort of pinned in this situation to go on the defensive, given the fact that Fluttermane is available for Nick to utilize and try to target down any sort of KOs with.
Yeah, but I think the problem is here for Nick that the Fluttermane has got that Choice Specs item. It can't protect here, so it's an easy play for Eric just to protect the Como-O. Might be pinned this turn, but you've got the Heavy Slam with the Ting Lu. It's not going to go down to either attack from the Gouging Fire or the Fluttermane this turn, so you can get that Heavy Slam off into that Fluttermane, potentially pick up a big knockout and remove the one thing that you would be worrying about coming onto the field if you are utilizing that Como-O and the body press.
As we are going to see just that unfold. The Fluttermane feeling very threatened, switches out for the Rillaboom. This will actually bring the grassy terrain onto the field, have Fake Out available for the subsequent turn over on Nick's side to take advantage of this protect and defensive play from the Como-O. So Howl actually being opted now, being able to bring +1 attack back up to itself, but as well as Rillaboom. And Rillaboom with +1 is a huge threat, and the fact that Heavy Slam is not able to do that much really actually puts Nick into an interesting position. Like you mentioned, Lee, it's more so trying to position around the Fluttermane and get it onto the field when it can threaten the Como-O, but the Ting Lu is a big blockade on that front.
Yeah, and you almost need to be able to get the Fluttermane onto the field the same turn that the Como-O is forced into a protect. So that next turn is pinned, and you have it in that position where you can remove it, knowing that the Ting Lu has already terrestrialized, and it doesn't have a way to get around that, because Eric is going to be not really keen on switching it out because he's got those 2 iron defenses already. Now, both things on the field, on Nick's side of the field, do feel a little bit threatened here. He does have the Fake Out support to kind of alleviate some of that body press threat this turn, so it can go into the Como-O here, but it does leave you open to maybe get another Howl off with the Gouging Fire, as we see the Intimidate coming onto the field to try and mitigate those attack boosts on Nick's side of the field.
Yeah, and I do like Eric's play here. He's able to have Fake Out available, bring back the attack to neutral, but more importantly, preserve the Ting Lu, as it seems so strong against that Fluttermane, being able to just make it feel uncomfortable enough to leave the field. But Fairy Terrestrialization on the Gouging Fire.
Yeah, really nice defensive Terror type here, especially if we do see that body press into the Gouging Fire, because it is going to be able to take it a lot better, but not into the Gouging Fire, into the Rillaboom, picking up a clean one-hit kill.
Wow, it is gone from the field, just going to show testament as to why Como-O is so good with this Iron Defense body press set, already now at +4. This Gouging Fire cannot threaten it, so Nick really needs to try to get rid of this Pokemon. You do have a Fluttermane, but you just feel so limited because of the switch potential that Eric has available.
Yeah, and the ability to parting shot here, especially because it's a free parting shot into the Fluttermane if the Incineroar survives, right? Because you know the Fluttermane can't protect you, so if you can get that parting shot off, then you can bring in your Ting Lu. And after everything else on the opposite side of the field, on Nick's side of the field, has attacked, so it's really safe way to get that Ting Lu onto the field to protect that Como-O this next turn. You've got to protect it here because the Fluttermane does threaten, because it hasn't been able to terrestrialize, and it's still that dragon typing.
Yeah, as Vessel of Ruin will now have an effect on the field. We are going to, of course, see that defensive play coming up from the Como-O, wanting to avoid any sort of one-hit KOs. Heat Crash does focus down on Ting Lu, deals very pitiful amounts of damage due to the heavy base power sort of differentials between both of these very heavy Pokemon. And we did actually see Moonblast being the focus choice of the slot, or the Fluttermane trying to get rid of that Como-O, but it would have been nice if at least I would have targeted the Ting Lu.
Yeah, the question here is does Eric kind of leave the Como-O in? Probably not. It probably goes down to a Moonblast. So do you switch it for something like the Amoonguss or the Incineroar here, knowing that the Moonblast is coming in? The Amoonguss is a great switch, but if you do that, it gives an opening for Nick to go for the Heat Crash into that slot and potentially pick up a knockout, make things a little bit more difficult. And for the return of that, you've got to make sure that you go for the Heavy Slam into the Fluttermane and pick up the knockout.
But there is no protect and no switch out from this Como-O, and it's already been felled by that Moonblast of the Fluttermane. We saw Eric and Nick playing a bit of mind game galore, going around, and guess what? One KO on one side, another KO on another, one-hit KOs all around for everybody to be able to feast upon this great match.
This is an incredible turn here for both players, getting something out of that turn. Huge for Eric being able to remove the Fluttermane that was such a threat to the Como-O, but at the same time, losing the Como-O now and not having access to it to close down the rest of this match. Eric must feel comfortable with what he's got out in the field in front of that Ogerpon and the Gouging Fire to be able to close this up from this point. Has got more Pokemon this stage in the game, so has the advantage there.
Yep.
But you have got the Gouging Fire, you have got the Ogerpon Ogerpon, you have got that Howl that can boost those attack stats. Both of these Pokemon that are sitting in pretty comfortable a position right now.
Yeah, and I think Ting Lu is really the main threat right now. It's sort of alleviated from Kumo being the main carry to Ting Lu, because at the moment there's no direct way that the Gouging Fire can inflict as substantial amount of damage as it needs on the Ting Lu, so it has to rely on the Ogerpon, maybe in combination with continuing in support over the Howl.
Yeah, that's it, and we do see that Howl come out. It is going to boost the attack on the Gouging Fire and that Ogerpon one stage further, making them hit a lot harder. The Ivy Cudgel coming out from the Ogerpon into that Amoonguss. A great switch again from Eric just to catch that as a Terra Blast coming out now from the Ting Lu into the Ogerpon. How much damage is this going to do? Not quite enough, but respectable damage. Further increasing it. It's getting closer to getting knocked out. And the Amoonguss now in that position where it will be threatened by the Heat Crash. But Eric playing this really well where he's got that Incineroar in the back. He can bring it in once again to kind of mitigate the Howl, the attack boost that the Gouging Fire and the Ogerpon have. So do you kind of lock yourself into the position where you start cycling this Intimidate and make the Gouging Fire kind of have to keep going for the Howl to get those attack boosts, but all the while you're taking damage from the Ting Lu and not really doing the damage that you need to remove it from the field, because at the moment that is the one key piece that you need to remove if you're Nick. I don't know if he's got the firepower to do it. Yeah,
it's very heavy cycle switching at the current moment as Howl does come out yet again. The Gouging Fire is now at +2, completely ignored that Amoonguss at that moment, and the Horn Leech, this is the reason why Nick wanted to try to focus on getting a bit of recovery, let itself remove itself from the range of succumbing to a KO from this Terra Blast, as I think it does, unless there's any sort of RNG that comes into effect. Yes, it does continue its stay on the field, but Fake Out's available once again on the field for Eric. However, I feel like he may still feel inclined on actually getting those switches going.
Yeah, and I think you've got to really prioritize that if you are Eric, because of these Howls, you can't allow the Gouging Fire to get another Howl. Now you've got the Incineroar out on the field. You've got to utilize that Fake Out pressure. The one thing you would say Nick could really look into here is that every time that Eric's pretty much had this Incineroar on the field, he hasn't went for the Fake Out. He switched it straight out or went for the parting shot. So you could maybe take advantage of this and go for the Ivy Cudgel. It's risky. Not going to say it here. Just a spiky shield to kind of protect yourself this turn around as another Howl comes out from the Gouging Fire, looking like it may be a parting shot from the Incineroar into that Gouging Fire slot as the Ting Lu is just left to do what it wants this turn.
Exactly, as of course, because of this interaction, it does bypass the spiky shield, allowing the Ogerpon to still get that +1 attack boost. However, the parting shot, like you mentioned, Lee, Eric didn't actually opt to go for the Fake Out. Once again, trying to get that cycle going with the switches between the Amoonguss and the Incineroar in order to slow down the offensive prowess of Nick's Pokemon, because that's what he really needs to try to do. He needs to lock down, pick up a KO. The moment that Ogerpon is gone, this is surely Eric's game.
Yeah, and there is a play here where you actually switch out the Ting Lu off your Eric and go for the Pollen Puff into the Ogerpon, hoping that you go for the Horn Leech into the Ting Lu this turn where it's not going to be effective, and hopefully take a Heat Crash. You can see the Gouging Fire is +1, so you can mitigate that with an Intimidate. Can Amoonguss take a Heat Crash, a neutral attack from the Gouging Fire? That's the big question here, because that is a play that you're open to. Once you remove that Ogerpon, the match becomes a lot easier. 3 versus 1 is a lot easier than 3 versus 2.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that Gouging Fire doesn't have a direct way to, at least for now, threaten the Ting Lu means that it really needs to try to keep on relying on the Ogerpon. So well called there, Lee. The switch has been made. Incineroar is now on the field instead of Ting Lu, getting yet another Intimidate going. And this Amoonguss is going to have to try to survive the Heat Crash, and it does not actually. Critical hit! One hit KO! All of a sudden changes the dynamics of this match, allowing the Ogerpon to go and get a tiny bit of recovery via the Horn Leech. Wow! What a turn of events with another critical hit!
That is a huge turn here for Nick, really getting a fortunate critical hit to take down the Amoonguss. We'll never know if it was able to take that or not. Probably would have been able to, but here we go. Nick taking a huge lead back back into this match in prime position now. The Incineroar on Eric's side cannot switch out, cannot cycle and intimidate, and the Howl can be utilized here to really start closing out this game from Nick. Has to be careful with the Ogerpon here, but does have access to that spiky shield, can kind of prevent it from getting any damage this turn, while the Gouging Fire could potentially go for another Howl, boost the attack stat even further, and put himself in a bit of a position to start closing this out, but not over yet. Tinglu's still very healthy. Incineroar has access to Fake Out, so can at least mitigate something this turn.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, at least from Nick's side, you want to be able to play a bit more passive here. There's no direct line that Eric will be able to pick up a KO onto the Gouging Fire, hence why it tries to go for the Howl setup. Terrablast does go into that Ogerpon, and of course, because of that, it is going to be a bit of a race right now. I think that's what we've identified here, Lee. The Ogerpon needs to be able to get Horn Leech recovery to remove itself from the range of being picked up with a KO from that Tinglu's Terrablast.
Yeah, that's the thing. And the Gouging Fire, the fastest thing on the field, so going to be able to get that Howl off before anything else can move, meaning that the Horn Leech should be powered up. Hopefully enough for Nick to be able to get the health back that he needs to get through this turn, and then you can cultivate a situation where it is the Gouging Fire versus the Tinglu one-on-one. And in this situation, you would say with a Howl, no Incineroar potentially, then you're going to be in a better position to close this one out. It's going to go right down to the wire as we see another Howl come out from that Gouging Fire.
Here we go. I've completely lost track on how many attack boosts this Ogerpon has, but it doesn't actually opt to go for the Horn Leech. It goes for the Ivy Cudgel instead, picks up the KO on the Incineroar, but the real question is right now, this Tinglu is looking mighty fine to pick up a KO via the Terrablast onto the Ogerpon, which will leave us to a 1 versus 1 scenario. Tinglu Fairy Terra type versus the Gouging Fire Fairy as well.
The one thing that the Tinglu does have access to that'll be super effective into the Gouging Fire is that Heavy Slam.
Yeah.
How much is that going to do though? That is the big question, because if you can do enough damage, you can probably get it in 2 hits. You might be able to do it, but
there it is.
Here it is, Costa. The Burning Bulwark. If you attack into it this turn with the Heavy Slam, which we're not going to see, it would have picked up the burn. A really smart play there from Eric to avoid that status condition. Now leaving him open to go for it this turn if he wants to, but looking like just locking in with that Terrablast once again.
Yeah, so it's very mind read heavy. The fact that the Heavy Slam will be a contact move versus the Terrablast not being as such creates this bit of dynamic between Nick and Eric, where they need to try to catch each other off on every other turn, essentially. So it is mind read heavy at this point, but more so, Nick needs to be able to have more damage output onto this Tinglu, which seems like is the reason why we have yet another Howl being set up.
Yeah, the Howl is a very good option. I think Nick needs to go down because he needs to get that attack boosted to the stage where he is going to be able to close out this Tinglu. You can see here the Terrablast doing not bad damage, but not really the damage you'd want to be seeing if you are Eric. And now the turn where you haven't seen the Burning Bulwark probably is a turn where you can go for the Burning Bulwark with Nick. So you really, again, put off going for that Heavy Slam, which is not probably going to do that much anyway. But we're seeing the Heat Crash from the Gouging Fire, and not near enough, even after those Howls.
No, definitely not, as the Terrablast is the main key player here. It's not going to pick up the KO, however, the final hit will, and it's sort of the interesting interaction between Heavy Slam and the Heat Crash. They're both, their base power is both based on the weight of the individual Pokemon. So all of a sudden, we have Eric guaranteeing that Game 1 win.
Incredible end to the game. It would have been a little bit closer, I think, if we hadn't maybe seen the critical hit on the Amoonguss. But like I say, we'll never know if that did pick up the knockout or not. But you would say that Eric was putting himself in the right position with the Incineroar there to potentially pick a knockup out onto the Ogerpon. Didn't send out, and it gave us a really, really interesting end game there. But like you say, I think with the Heavy Slam, we'll never know what the damage is. The Terrablast is probably the better option there, and I think the fact that the both Fairy Terra types made it an interesting end game, and the fact that Nick wasn't able to get enough Howls in that point of the end game to get the damage that you needed. I mean, earlier on in the game, we saw what Heat Crash did to the Tinglu, and it really...
Or more like
just,
did not
do. Did not do, pretty much. It was almost like it was healing it rather than actually damaging it.
So
you really need to acquire a lot of Howls to be able to have enough of an impact against that Pokemon and just not able to do it with how Eric was able to cycle in the Intimidates. And I think that's the thing. If you are Nick going into this match, you've got to prevent the Incineroar from being so free to cycle in and out with those Intimidates, so you can actually utilize the Howl. That is the route that you want to go down. Perfect Pokemon to do that, of course, is Kingambit, because it does have that Define ability, and it really doesn't allow you, if you're Eric, to cycle in that Intimidate as freely. And then you've got the Gouging Fire that can also utilize the Howl at the same time to further boost that attack.
Yeah, and yeah, there's definitely a lot of different dynamics to take into consideration, both for both trainers, actually. However, we do have Game 2 upon us. We're going to go ahead and find out the leads from both of the trainers, and it seems like Nick is leading with the Gouging Fire and Flutter Mane versus Eric's Kommo-o and Amoonguss.
Yeah, really nice lead here for Nick. A very offensive lead, oppressive lead straight away, where the Flutter Mane is going to threaten the Kommo-o if it doesn't terastallize. Of course, if you do go for the attack, the Kommo-o is in that position where it can protect this turn, and the Amoonguss potentially can go for a Spore into the Flutter Mane slot. Will the Gouging Fire be able to pick up the knockout? Maybe a combination of a Dazzling Gleam, Heat Crash into the Amoonguss could be enough to remove it from the field. So has to be careful with the Amoonguss. So I'll be seeing Eric just switch it out here, not want to take any risks as the Incineroar hits the field.
Hits the field, will have Fake Out available on the subsequent turn, and of course, more importantly, does actually bring that Gouging Fire's attack down to -1. That in combination with the Kommo-o defensive protect will just want to better position itself in order to have the support of Fake Out as well as Parting Shot available on the field. So Kommo-o may even be inclined to try to go for the Steel Terastallization. However, we have the Shadow Ball focus onto the Incineroar in conjunction with that Breaking Swipe. We'll be able to deal about 30 or 25%-ish damage, which isn't that bad on an instant.
Yeah, not bad at all, really. But now knowing that the Flutter Mane's locked into that Shadow Ball because it is holding the Choice Specs item, it does give Eric a little bit of room to go for this Iron Defense here on the Kommo-o, and I think that's the route that he wants to go down. Get those Iron Defenses up and utilize the Body Press like he wasn't really able to do in that Game 1 because he lost it to the Moonblast from the Flutter Mane in the late game. Whereas if you had the Kommo-o in that situation, that end game would have been completely different. So I think this is a great opportunity to start getting that Iron Defense up, and I think the thing is Nick really needs to be aware of that and start trying to mitigate it with maybe Howls. We are seeing a Breaking Swipe here.
A Breaking Swipe, but no further defensive play from this Kommo-o, as the fact that Shadow Ball has been locked in allows it more room for maneuverability. However, that's still a lot of damage that it's had to actually incur, and that in combination with that Breaking Swipe is not looking too hot at the moment. Parting Shot, however, will once again now focus actually onto the Gouging Fire, allowing Eric to get that Amoonguss going. And the fact that Amoonguss is most likely the Pokemon that's going to switch in here, unless we have the Ting Lu reveal, means that you've got that availability of being able to get the healing and bring that Kommo-o back up. So Eric always has that option to take into consideration.
Yeah, and it's nice because I think the Kommo-o having the leftovers can take a turn to protect here. The Ting Lu coming onto the field for Eric now, and will threaten the Flutter Mane now with that Heavy Slam that it does have access to. So kind of making Nick take the Flutter Mane off the field, really reposition, which could give the Kommo-o a little bit of room. Of course, if it does stay on the field and it does Shadow Ball and Kommo-o doesn't protect, then it will go down. So a risky play here if Eric decides to go for another Body Press. But the Gouging Fire -2 attack at the moment, not in the best place offensively, so not really offering anything other than maybe a Howl. Another Breaking Swipe here could help. Of course, that will be good to mitigate the damage output from the Ting Lu. Not really going to matter too much from the Kommo-o, but you would say here, probably the safest play from Eric, protect that Kommo-o and maybe try and get an attack off with that Ting Lu into whatever's coming in place of it.
Yeah, because Eric could have gone more on the offensive, and it was sort of at this point, you're in the lead, you feel like you don't have to make that risky play just yet. The pressure is more on Nick's side. However, we do have that terastallization in order to forego its weakness to Fairy by becoming Fairy itself with the Ting Lu.
Yeah, and that Fairy terastallization going to be what Eric leans on again, as we do see that protect from the Kommo-o, not wanting to take any damage or risk anything this turn. There's the Howl, once again boosting the attack on the Gouging Fire, taking it to -1 attack and taking that Ogerpon to +1. We're going to see the Heavy Slam into that slot, but taking it very comfortably because of the resistance, hot water typing, but a critical hit there from the heavy slam doing a bit more damage than you would expect it to do there.
Yeah, a bit reminiscent to that game one, as it did actually in a very similar situation get a critical hit with a heavy slam switch out of the iron of the Flutter Mane into that Ogerpon. But more importantly, right now, you're able to have that reposition. Like you mentioned, the Ting Lu did scare off that Flutter Mane temporarily. It is no longer susceptible to those breaking swipes from that gouging fire because of the fairy terrestrialization, which in turn means that gouging fire doesn't feel as useful as it would have liked, hence why Nick's trying to reposition yet again for having that available switch out. Perfectly timed with Eric's switch out of the Ting Lu.
Yeah, really nice switch out there to bring the Flutter Mane back onto the field, reset those Intimidate drops that it's already taken from the Incineroar earlier on in this battle, and an Incineroar coming in, dropping another Intimidate onto this Ogerpon, which goes for the Spiky Shield to avoid any damage, primarily from this body press that's coming out from the Como this turn, and as a bonus, you're going to get a little bit of chip damage from that Spiky Shield attacking into it there, but Como going to be in a position where it can potentially recover that off with the leftovers here, but in a position now where the Flutter Mane's been positioned so well by Nick to come back in, really pressure that Como here with a Moonblast, forcing almost to protect from Eric's side of the field. The Como the Ogerpon as well does threaten that Incineroar.
And a Moongus is always available as a good switch in here to any sort of fairy type moves that will be coming out from the Flutter Mane, as it's so great in being able to sponge up that damage. Hence why we do actually see Eric opting in for that choice, going for the Protect as well, whilst trying to maintain this Como O's longevity on the field. We do see Dazzling Gleam actually being opted from that Flutter Mane, wanting to make sure and be safe that it can still deal damage to whatever Pokemon is switching in, as Ivy Cudgel in combination is actually dealing respectful amounts of damage.
Yeah, and now Nick in a bit more of a driving position here, because yes, you've got the Amoonguss on the field if you're Eric, and you can sponge up those attacks. You're not going to take any damage really from them, although it is respectable. The Como is still in a position where it is going to get knocked out if it stays in this turn, because the Dazzling Gleam going to be able to pick up the Como here, and it really puts Nick in a really nice position going forward in this match, where the Ogerpon's still in a position where it's not going to be spoiled this turn. It can take a bit of pollen puff damage, but not at risk of getting knocked out.
No, as the Como is finally actually going to be switching out right here, not wanting to risk the Dazzling Gleam KO pickup there, as no longer has the availability of being able to terrestrialize into the Steel type in order to survive it. We do have Incineroar on the field, Intimidate, further mitigating damage output of that Ogerpon, which actually opts to go for the redirect there. Follow me, which will not be effective with this Moongus, I would say, normally if it weren't that grass type, but it has not terrestrialized. It still does have that grass type, which is so great, and one of the main reasons why we've seen Ogerpon rise up in usage.
Yeah, and a really nice play here from Nick to mitigate that Spore threat onto the Flutter Mane. The problem is now the Flutter Mane is going to be susceptible to that Spore with the fake out support from the Incineroar that can go into that Ogerpon this turn. Coming out onto the field again, dropping that Intimidate. But if you are Flutter Mane here, you could almost take the risk of saying, well, put me to sleep, because I can remove the Incineroar at the same time with a Dazzling Gleam. And is it worth it at that point where my Gouging Fire can come in the next turn and potentially get those howls off, and I don't need to worry so much about that Intimidate cycle anymore?
Oh, but we have a reveal of the King Gambit with the safety dodgers. Is such an appropriate switch in from Nick's side. Good shout, Lee. I think it really has a good place with the double switch actually from Nick, completely changing the board state, having the Gouging Fire and King Gambit alongside one another. The potential of howls is high at this point.
And this really changes the dynamic of the game for Nick, because now the Heat Crash is going to be unintimidated. You can get a howl off as well, but the Amoonguss so low health, that Heat Crash is definitely picking up the knockout into it. Also, the King Gambit as well in a position where it could probably go for a Kowtow Cleave into the Amoonguss and just knock it out, where leaving the Gouging Fire to go for the Heat Crash into the Incineroar. Probably enough at this range to pick up the knockout onto that, really making it difficult for Eric to switch anything in here, as we're seeing the Protect on the Amoonguss just to avoid a knockout this turn.
Yeah, I think Eric does have to actually allow one of his slots to be susceptible to any of Nick's moves here. Parting shot, however, actually going to be outspeeding the King Gambit with the Incineroar there, bringing that attack down as well on the Gouging Fire, but more importantly, having the pivot action going. Now, we know that the King Gambit only has access to Dark-type moves as its offensive attack moves, and may even just be a setup here of the Sword Stance. So prime position for Nick to go ahead, take advantage and momentum of this game too.
Yeah, this is a huge play, getting the Sword Stance here, knowing there was no threat from that Incineroar. It was probably going to have to be forced out, and it really pins Eric into a position where he's not going to really be able to bring it back onto the field to mitigate the attack on that Gouging Fire anymore, because if he does, it's going to activate that Defiant ability on the King Gambit, and you really want to try and avoid to do that. You still got to pay attention to the Amoonguss here because it is threatening a spore into the Gouging Fire.
Yep.
If you leave it alone, if you don't respect it this turn, that is something that could happen. So you have to be aware of that. But has that Gouging Fire, has the King Gambit got enough to take down this Kelmo-O? Because a body press into the King Gambit, you don't see the Terrestrialize there, will be enough to pick up the knockout.
And it does allow Nick to still take advantage of Terrestrialization on their side of the field. We know that the King Gambit is Dragon typing. You want to try and get away from the body press pressure, and that is exactly what we're seeing right now. This King Gambit is really starting to set itself up to completely sweep the game, given the Intimidates that will be further adding to its strength.
As the Dragging Terror type comes out from the King Gambit to avoid any body press action here from that potential Kelmo-O, and we are going to see the Howl boosting that attack stat even further, but not opting to attack, going for that Iron Defense, boosting the defense stat on that Kelmo-O by 2 stages. Kowtow Cleave coming out and into the Tinglu. A really nice defensive switch here from Eric, able to take that because of the Fairy Terror typing that he went for earlier on in this match.
As we are in a very interesting situation where Eric has actually gotten the one setup of Iron Defense going, now at +2 of its defense, does mean that all of the additional damage that King Gambit will be starting to stock up with, let's say Sword Dance or any sort of Intimidate, proccing, Defiant interactions, means that Como is just going to be able to buff it off, especially because of its fighting type 2. It's just going to be able to counteract and further strengthen itself unless Nick can directly threaten it.
Protect coming out here from King Gambit, not wanting to contend with any of these Fairy Terror Blasts. All body presses here as another Howl comes out from the Gouging Fire, taking the attack stat up to +2 on the Gouging Fire and +4 on that King Gambit.
Yeah, as we have another +4 on the field, but it's actually the Como-O instead with its defense stages. Terror Blast, like you mentioned, Lee, is the main focus. Now that the King Gambit is a Dragon Terror, it is susceptible and weak to it.
It all comes down to the speed stats of these Pokemon.
Yep.
If the Como-O and the Tinglu outspeed that King Gambit, they can potentially remove it from the field before it is able to utilize any of those attack boosts. But by doing that, you're kind of ignoring the Gouging Fire that's on +2 itself, and you're not able to really bring in the Incineroar until King Gambit has gone down.
Yep.
We are going to see the Tinglu leave the field, though, keeping it for later. As we're going to see the Incineroar hit the field, it is going to be able to get an Intimidate onto the field, but that's not good news because the King Gambit's Defiant ability is activated.
It's activated. It is at +5 and counting. Trying to go for the Sucker Punch there in anticipation of the Tinglu focus. However, it's going to fail unless there was another Iron Defense on the Como-O, actually, as the Heat Crash is enough to pick up the KO onto the Incineroar. And I think, yeah, this is the final stage. No, actually, it confirms Body Press. Nearly picking up the KO onto the King Gambit, completely knocking it out, but it's able to survive on a slither
of health. Yeah, the King Gambit just holding on. A really nice utility of the Incineroar there to come in and predict that Sucker Punch. Really waste a turn of the King Gambit here and then utilize that body press, getting some huge damage off onto the King Gambit to try and remove it from the field, but not quite enough. It is still here for another round. Can the Amoonguss help, though? Because the Amoonguss has access to that Rage Powder. It is going to be able to draw in any attacks, but the Gouging Fire +1 at the minute will be able to knock it out pretty easily with a Heat Crash into that slot.
And I feel like Gouging Fire is actually working against Nick right now. If that was a Flutter main, you would be in a prime position to try to focus down with your +5 now, King Gambit, and have the Dazzling Gleam being the option. Get rid of the Como-O, focus down and pick up the KO on Amoonguss, and all of a sudden that spells great news for yourself. However, the Tinglu is the main key player on Eric's side of the field, waiting in the back to get rid of the Flutter main.
Sucker Punch coming out here from the King Gambit, but those Iron Defenses hugely paying off here as the Como shrugs it off. He crashed into the Amoonguss, but the Protect giving it room to last at least one more turn here. And the body press not into the King Gambit here, into the Gouging Fire, and just missing the knockout.
I'm not sure if that's in Nick's advantage or not, if I'm completely honest. The survival, yes, it can be important, but in whose favor?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. You make a really good point before where you want the Fluttermane out onto the field so it can deal with that Como, so it isn't a threat to a King Gambit. It then frees up the King Gambit to move a lot freer. Go for those Kowtow Cleaves, go for those Sucker Punches, or whatever you really wanted to. But at the moment, because of those iron defenses, the Como in a position where it's really not worried what the Gouging Fire is doing, and it can go after that King Gambit.
So it just depends right now on which slot Nick needs to focus down on. If he can somehow find if they could somehow find a way to get rid of the Ting Lu, that would be so great for themselves. He crashed to a negligible amount of damage, but the Como actually outspeeds the King Gambit, does pick up the KO, and this is already spelling some great trouble for Nick's hopes in trying to secure the top 4 place.
Yeah, losing the King Gambit is huge here because it takes away a big option for being able to get some big damage out into the field. Plus 5 attack as well, as Kowtow Cleaves would be doing a lot of damage to whatever we've got sitting on the opposite side. Of course, Como is the big problem. You need to get the Fluttermane out on the field to be able to remove that. Ogerpon being opted for right now, and Ting Lu in a really pretty comfortable position. You can see how much the Heat Crash was doing, not really affecting it too much. But I think you've got to deal with the Ting Lu before the Fluttermane comes onto the field, or at least get some good damage onto it, so the Fluttermane can come in, close up this game.
As the Ting Lu and Como are on Eric's side of the field right now, the Gouging Fire is just surviving at this point, and Ogerpon isn't really primed up to be in a position to get rid of this Ting Lu, because Nick just needs to allow more breathing space for their Fluttermane. It's what we've been talking about. The moment Fluttermane is allowed to just do its thing, get the damage it needs to, it may be able to push this win.
Another howl coming out here from the Gouging Fire, as it does further boost that attack stat and put that Ogerpon to +1, because the Ogerpon could be a key here. It can get that attack boost, and it can have the access to that Ivy Cudgel, which is a high critical hit move. So that is something maybe Nick is looking at right now to get that damage he needs before the Fluttermane comes out onto the field and start trying to claw this match back. Can't forget about the Amoonguss in the back though as well.
No, and I think the fact that Nick unfortunately lost that King Gambit sort of means that it's going to be more difficult to be able to handle the Amoonguss, as we get yet another regenerator proc. It allows itself to just be so versatile in its efforts and actually sponging up any sort of damage that may be coming from Nick's way.
Yeah, and I think if you are Eric at this point, you really want to be removing the Gouging Fire as soon as possible. You want to take away the option for those howls to be something that you can lean on, and you also want to take away the big threat to the Amoonguss as well, so it's freer to come onto the field and really support how Eric wants it to. At the moment, Heat Crash is a big risk to it, and you've got to be careful though, because the Como doesn't have the option to really freely attack into the Gouging Fire. If you go for it and then hit into a Burning Ball Walk, it becomes a lot more difficult because you've got the burn and you've got that chip damage every turn that the burn brings along with it.
Oh, but we're finally going to be seeing the Fluttermane that has hid away ever since the beginning of this game 2 being brought onto the field. Ting Lu actually switching out right now for the Amoonguss, and we actually got a quick indication there that we have 3 minutes remaining with the in-game timer, and there's a read with the Heat Crash KO onto the Amoonguss. My lord, one hit KO. What a substantial and important pickup there.
Huge knockout here. The Gouging Fire predicting the Amoonguss switching, getting the knockout, unfortunately taking the Rocky Headmont damage, and because of that, going down itself, leaving this Fluttermane in a position locked out on the field now. Going to have the Ogerpon supporting it, but it will be able to threaten this Como, and the Ting Lu coming back onto the field for Eric, which then does threaten that Fluttermane. But because you've got the follow me redirection, you're in a great position to really close up and tie this matchup if you're Nick.
Nick is representing the local community to an exceptional level. Right now, we thought that this was more so in favor of Eric, but this sort of dynamic change will really prove to be something that Nick needs to try to focus down, pick up the Ting Lu if possible, but no, there's a lock into the Dazzling Gleam here, unless we see some sort of high roll, critical hit from the Ivy Cudgel. It may or may not be over, but this is going to be the moment we're waiting for. It's enough! It's enough! Nick has brought this back into a game 3.
tying this top 8 match up. And here, the Commodore left. All it's got to do is take a dazzling gleam. Nick ties this up and masterfully tying this game, taking it to that game 3.
Oh, what fashion, what style Nick has been able to bring to this top 8. And all of a sudden, the game 3 is here. The match is still on.
Let's breathe for a minute.
I'm gonna have to.
What an incredible show there from Nick. Really looked like it was on the line all that way through. Eric positioning his Pokemon like he does really well, but Nick not giving up, positioning that Fluttermane, keeping it right till the end, and into the spot where he could clean up. Caught the Amoonguss with that Heat Crash, which is a huge turn, and then flipping it around and pinning Eric in exactly where he wanted him to be to take it to a game 3.
What an incredible transition of board state. My word, that's what we're talking about, folks. If you can get that one read when you have your back against the wall, that can just absolutely unlock the set for yourself and swing all the momentum in your favor. And Nick has done that incredibly well.
So, such a tight game as well, coming right down to the wire, and really between the Commodore, avoiding that Fluttermane. And I think it really was about how Nick was able to preserve the Fluttermane really until that very end point where it felt safe to bring it in, pin it in, and get rid of the Commodore. And not really take too much damage from throughout that game either, really managing the situation where it was +4 defense. But the body press wasn't really the issue there.
It was not. However, get ready, folks. We are here with game 3 between these two titans of form when it comes to VG. We've got Nick Schrott bringing that gouging fire yet again, accompanied by the Fluttermane, versus Eric's Kommo-o and Ting Lu.
Yeah, the Ting Lu already threatening that Fluttermane with the heavy slam here. So a real threat if you are Nick. And do you want to preserve that Fluttermane for later, knowing how important it is for that Kommo-o? Probably. Do you detect that though if you're Eric and maybe take the chance to go for another attack into the gouging fire? Do you switch out your Kommo-o here to the Incineroar? It's a pretty easy switch in this situation, but do you do that and then find yourself in front of maybe an Ogerpon here, leaving that gouging fire open to do whatever it wants, go for a Howl, and then get themselves set up going into this next turn? It's very tricky deciding what to do here, but I think if you're Eric, you have to chase down after that Fluttermane, try and get the heavy slam onto it.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like a mandatory turn in order to at least have that potential of picking off that such crucial key piece for Nick. Whilst no switch outs from Eric's side of the field, we are going to, however, see a terrestrialization, that being, once again, the Ting Lu. It has been the main cornerstone of terrestrialization Pokemon for Eric so far this set.
Yeah, and you can see why it's been so useful throughout the set, and we are going to see the Howl from the gouging fire, boosting that attack stat to +1, as well as that Ogerpon as well. Are we going to see the yes, we are, the iron defense from the Kommo-o? Eric not taking any time to go for those iron defenses and get them set up as soon as possible with that heavy slam into the Ogerpon.
Heavy slam into the Ogerpon, as we've seen the exact same play being made across all 3 games at this point. It's just such a good switch in for Nick to be able to take advantage of. So Fluttermane is temporarily gone. It's gone back into hiding, waiting for its moment to shine later on, where it can directly threaten that Kommo-o yet again, as well as any sort of Ting Lu that has lowered HP.
Heat Crash coming out from the gouging fire into the Ting Lu, not doing a huge amount of damage here, as the Ivy Cudgel will double into that slot. Huge critical hit and pick up some big damage there as another iron defense comes out from this Kommo-o, boosting that defense even further. But the Ting Lu taking some huge damage as a heavy slam comes into that gouging fire, maybe trying to predict a Fluttermane switch on Nick's side of the field.
Yeah, you could see because of the fatigue both of these trainers are going through, surely you feel like the tempo is changing drastically. Maybe trainers don't want to opt for playing safe anymore. They want to go on the offensive. They want to try to quicken up this game and catch their opponent by surprise. So unfortunately, Eric has not been able to do that just that turn.
Yeah, and want to preserve the Ting Lu for later because of the importance it has against that Fluttermane. The problem is it's taken so much damage, it's not going to be really able to be positioned that easily now going forward to get it in front of the Fluttermane to utilize that heavy slam. Incineroar coming in, getting the Intimidate, mitigating that Howl boost from default, taking a Heat Crash pretty comfortably, and the Ivy Cudgel coming out again. Is it into this slot? It is! And it will! just missed the knockout onto the Incineroar as a body press comes in return to pick up the Ogerpon.
Wow, and in what fashion as well? It nearly caught me off guard there, Nick. But the body press being more than enough, of course, to pick up the Ogerpon. So that means the Fluttermane no longer has a direct, safe switch in unless the Gouging Fire is in the back for any future heavy slams from that Ting Lu.
Yeah, and that's the problem. I think the big critical hit onto the Ting Lu really limits what Eric is able to do here, because if you switch out the Incineroar in this situation, bring the Ting Lu in, so low health, it's going to go down to anything that the Fluttermane really throws out at you at this stage. And because you've committed that Terra type to it early on, you can't terrestrialize the Kommo-o, which would have probably been, in this situation, the better Pokemon to terrestrialize. But obviously, that's in hindsight. You don't know how these games are going to play out. Switching the Incineroar out, keeping it for later to preserve that Intimidate. We do see the Amoonguss come onto the field, and now we are going to see a terrestrialization in response from Nick's side, and it will be into that Fluttermane, the Fairy Terra type. It will be boosting those Fairy type moves, making them even stronger, more threatening going into this turn, and will be threatening that potential Amoonguss that's just switched in.
Exactly, as Kommo going for the defensive once again. I was quite curious to actually see if there's going to be any sort of heat crash focus into the slot of the Amoonguss, but no, just a safe how you want to try to reset the damage output potential that the Gouging Fire can be capable of, especially when dealing with the little mushroom over the inside of Eric's field. But like you mentioned, Lee, it's more so the fact that Ting Lu, because of the critical hit, it does not have that bolt that it normally would be able to shrug off any sort of hyper-focus damage coming out from the Fluttermane.
Yeah, and Nick pinning Eric in this position here, because now you're in that position where a heat crash from the Gouging Fire, it's taken the turn to go for that Howl, boost its attack up, it will threaten a knockout onto the Amoonguss, leaving the Fluttermane in a position to get another Dazzling Gleam off into that Kommo-o. If it does take it, it goes down, potentially knocking both things out here. But you've got a very low health Incineroar and a very low health Ting Lu in the back. Protect fails, as we are going to see a heat crash come out from the Gouging Fire. Is it enough?
It's enough! Of course it's more than enough, and that in combination with the Dazzling Gleam does mean we will have Nick progressing most likely straight into the semi-finals. There it is, single target, Fairy Terra boosted, choice bets. Of course it's enough. 4 times super effective. See you later, Alligator. Take care, Kommo.
Absolutely incredible play here. Positioning perfection from Nick, and all that's come in from Eric is the Incineroar, 16 health points, and the Ting Lu on 45. No shape to be able to take on a +1 or neutral attack Gouging Fire and a Terra Fairy Fluttermane.
Wow. What a turn of events. Nick has brought this back from the edge of, I would say, blocking out and knocking out for themselves. And there you have it. Nick Schrott is guaranteed their semi-final spot.